All right. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, hello, wherever you are. Welcome to this amazing panel discussion on the universities of the future, building institutional resilience, social responsibility, and community impact. This particular panel will focus on student recruitment, admissions, and the challenges that universities have had, and how they've overcome these challenges over the last year and a half through the COVID-19 pandemic, right? I'd like to first start with introducing my distinguished speakers. I've got with me Professor Dr. Santiago Iñiguez de Onzoño, who's the president of IE University in Spain. We've got with us Professor Dr. Nirmala Rai, Vice Chancellor, Asian University for Women. And we have with us Professor Dr. Ivan Prostakov, who's the Vice Rector, Higher School of Economics University in Russia. And myself, Arjya Majumdar, the Dean of Admissions at the O.P. Jindal Global University in India, right? So this particular panel, as we've discussed, as we've mentioned, will focus on student recruitment. Now, student recruitment can often be a challenging process for universities, especially when aiming to achieve certain global standards of excellence and competing on a global level. And universities have to consistently seek and adopt best practices to increase the efficiency of their outreach and student recruitment plans. Now, over the last year and a half, universities all over the world have demonstrated formidable leadership, governance, and crisis management skills in embracing new academic and administrative strategies to adapt to the rapidly changing higher education landscape in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, universities have quickly transitioned into an online mode and experimented with several methods of student recruitment, including virtual campus tours, live and recorded webinars, online chats to keep students engaged. Admissions offices have devised new follow-up strategies to ensure student-institution relationships are maintained. Universities have also dedicated websites for COVID-19 related information and updates for students and their pandemics. In this context, this particular thematic session will provide a platform to discuss how university admission processes can adapt to challenges brought in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me start with Professor Santiago Iñiguez. Now, Professor Santiago, given that institutions worldwide have transitioned to e-classrooms and there's a mix of virtual learning, sometimes physical learning, sometimes a hybrid form of learning as well, how has this affected the admissions process for universities? What have been the key challenges in managing the student outreach and this recruitment process virtually? Professor Santiago.
Thanks very much, and thank you for inviting me and for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be talking with my colleagues on this very important thing. I guess we have all experienced over the past year exceptional circumstances. We didn't actually expect a pandemic will affect all the different activities of the value chain of education in this way. Our experience, given the international composition of our students, which is currently about 80% at the level of the undergraduate programs and 95% at the level of master's degree programs. So we have a very wide array of nationalities and cultures present on campus. So we very much depend on international applicants and on international mobility. Of course, you could imagine what has been the impact of the pandemic in recruiting students. We reacted very quickly in March last year. We passed all our admissions process to online formats, so that the whole admissions process could actually be completed online. And this, of course, has been extremely helpful in order to keep the same composition in class. But of course, we had to offer hybrid formats. We have a 20-year experience in running blended courses, which was, of course, an advantage because our faculty was prepared to jump overnight into hybrid formats. At the same time, some parts of our faculty are not that prepared. Let's think, for example, of the School of Law or the School of Global and Public Affairs. So we had to train those parts of the faculty very quickly, but we were able to move the whole organization to hybrid formats and invest in technology. Anyway, my takeaway from this experience is that, of course, the pandemic has accelerated changes in education, that probably blended formats are here to stay because they provide a much richer learning experience as compared to just, one of the formats, just solely online or solely in present. And then if I may just conclude by saying something, which is more, I guess, philosophical. No? We all say that we look for the best students, all our institutions. But the fact is that we mean different things, because depending on each of our institutions, some of us may be looking for, let's say, the entrepreneurs. Some others may be looking for those who are more solid in terms of their analytical skills. Some other in terms of their artistic aptitude. So what I mean is probably we need to identify what are the right mechanisms and platforms in order to attract the best possible candidates according to our own missions and according to the profile of students that each of our institutions look for, and try probably to get more detached from generalist platforms that just classify applicants under just one category. No, this would be, one of my major, suggestions for reforms in the future. But anyway, overall, the experience until now has been positive because we were able, to keep everything more or less in place.
Right. I think one of the key takeaways, Professor Santiago, is that universities will need to remain agile even as we move forward. And I can't help but sort of identify with some of the things that you said, that some of us were absolutely not prepared at all to move on to an online or a hybrid mode of teaching. And I think that's a response that we will get from many universities across the world. I noticed that our fourth distinguished speaker, Professor Debora, who is the rector at the University of Edinburgh, has just joined us. Thank you so much for joining in, Professor Debora. Great to have you with us. And of course, we'll go around the table with more questions. But I want to turn to now Professor Nirmala Rai. Now, Professor Rao, I know that you're the Vice Chancellor of the Asian University for Women, and it's a very, very different setup that the AUW has. Now, I'm given to understand that it's a completely philanthropic university, and it caters to a wide variety of demographic composition. Right? Now, could you tell us a little bit about the challenges that your university would have faced, particularly maintaining the demographic composition of the incoming batches, in the last 1 year and perhaps this year as well? Professor Rao.
Thank you, Arjya, and thank you first of all, for inviting me to share my reflections on this very important topic. So sitting where I am at AUW, I've been there 4 years, and prior to which I was at University of London, SOAS and Goldsmiths, where I was head of recruitment for nearly 3 decades. And so this is an entirely new challenge. As you rightly say, it's a very different setup. It's the university was established in 2008, so really in its 12th, 13th year of operation. And we have a particular challenge. When I arrived in 2017, 100% were on scholarships, and the business plan simply showed this was not going to be feasible, so we introduced fees. Right. And today we get about 17% of our total revenue from fees. Right. That's one. So given the student population, we have around 1,000 students from 19 different countries. And the second, obviously the vast majority are 40% from Bangladesh, but the second largest cohort from Afghanistan, and third from the refugee camps, Rohingya camps, and Yemen, Syria, conflict areas. The mission was, the university was set up to attract particularly women from quite disadvantaged, marginalized, difficult communities. And so we've concentrated by far on recruiting first in the family from these marginalized communities. So we have a good spread from, say, like I said, from the garment factories, for example, in Bangladesh, from the hill tribes, from Assam tea estates and Sri Lanka. So that is together with a small growing community from the affluent fee-paying communities. Right. So given that the context in which we are operating, the COVID, obviously, I mean, it hit us very hard, as it has, most universities, but particularly so when we are a donor university, completely donor driven. So we had to transition immediately to online, almost overnight. But the most important thing was, as you rightly said, agility is the key message here. I must say, a huge tribute to our faculty. It's a very good mix of very young and slightly older faculty. They're young, of course, either they're very agile and adept at online, or they come with absolutely no experience and needed some quick training. From the student perspective, we had a particular challenge. Students come from 19 different countries. To try and repatriate them to places like Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, border issues were predominantly the biggest challenge for us in terms of how do we repatriate, quite apart from the financial constraints that we were faced with. So the finances and the practicalities of sending them proved pretty difficult. Once having repatriated them, then the real challenge comes from how do we ensure we give them study packs or enhanced mobile data packs to enable them to access internet. Now, a lot of our students from Afghanistan are from deep mountain areas or from Chitral, Gilgit areas of deep Pakistan, where there's absolutely no internet connection. Even giving them data packs was redundant because there's no internet connectivity. So what we did was we carried on in the initial phase by asking whoever could have real-time lectures to adapt. But those who had no access to internet facilities, the faculty very quickly put recorded lectures on Google, on YouTube, and so that students could access at their own free will, through free time. But the most important, the practical steps we took was to assure students that when they return, they're given up to a year to catch up on the courses. University is still not open, of course. When they come, we need to give them that extra time. So it's financial plus, how do we relay the content to students? And 19 different countries means real-time lectures are very, very different.
Well, I think that's a fascinating story, Professor Rao. And when we're talking about the demographic composition of your students, something as basic as access to the internet, something that many of us take for granted because of our privilege, etc. And I think that story that you just told us brings into sharp focus the fact that millions of students around the world who perhaps deserve quality higher education are being denied because of a simple lack of access to the internet. Wonderful. I'm going to come back to that in a bit, but I want to turn now to the question of internationalization. Now, Professor Debora Kayembe, thank you very much for coming in. I'm going to turn to you now, because the University of Edinburgh does have a sizable international population as well. Now, internationalization for most universities is, of course, instrumental in driving diverse and inclusive experiences, right? Now, there have been restrictions on student mobility during this pandemic, right? We've been seeing it for the last 1.5 years. Now, what are some of the challenges that are being faced by universities across the world, and in your experience, Professor Debora, in driving international student outreach? Could you share some of the key innovations and experiments to overcome these challenges? Professor Debora.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. The University of Edinburgh, as you said, is a university who has a pro-international agenda and welcomes as much as international students. And the pandemic has been here and it has affected the university in a way that really everything just has changed overnight, just like my colleagues have said. But what I think is we need to do now as university is, although we have the financial mean, I don't deny that Edinburgh University has these means. We have to make sure that we reach places that we have never reached before. So this outreach has to go way over the traditional or the conservative route of the university to go to places that we have never been before and share the knowledge that we have kept for ourselves for so long to available to the others. because the truth is, with the pandemic, we have realized how the gap through our planet is. We have the poor who are going to die more and more and more, and the richer who still surviving, where we're not certain, because we're still through this pandemic and we don't know the way out. So what we thought this time at Edinburgh University is, we need to go to places we have never been before. Right. We need to reach out to people that did not benefit the excellence of our education. And again, we need to consider this time their cultural differences that we have and put that into research so we can understand how the world can survive this time, because we haven't survived it. We're trying to find a way out. So this is what we're trying to do at Edinburgh University right now. I was late joining you because this morning we were working on a Equality and Diversity Inclusion Committee. We're looking at how we're going to do with the international students. So the reality for us is no more just Europe, no more just Edinburgh, but go to places we have never been before and then share our knowledge so the world can move forward together.
That's really interesting, Professor Debora, because what you're actually trying to tell us is that because certain avenues of student recruitment or internationalization might have been closed off, that requires us as universities to sort of branch out into other regions, other areas that we wouldn't have thought of before, making us as universities more diverse and more inclusive and in a way more international. All right, I want to now turn to Professor Ivan Prostakov. So Professor Ivan, there have been students who have been, there are students right now in universities across the world who've probably finished an entire year of higher education without ever stepping into, the university campus, right? And I'm not just talking about international students, perhaps students from one region who cannot travel to another within the same country, right? Now, a very important aspect of completing the student recruitment is this orientation phase, the first few weeks or the first few days, which sort of drive a sense of identity and belonging, right, with a university campus. Now, when we are talking about our own campuses, we see them as thoughtful spaces of quiet reflection, which are inherently tied with the physical campus, right? Now, in the absence of a physical setting, what have been some of the experiments that perhaps your university may have conducted to ensure that students are still able to be sort of inducted into the larger university community, even in an online format? Professor Ivan.
Thank you. I'm also very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me for this panel and summits. In fact, the question of physical presence, of the direct contact between students in classrooms or between students and the professors is crucial for international students, for international mobility. It probably was one of the main challenges that we all had to face when the pandemic started. And unfortunately, we cannot replace this direct experience with online tools, with online experiments. Anyway, we tried to do the best, if I may say it. And I would like also to react on some topics and questions raised by my colleagues. Of course, we all try to attract talents, young talents, to have best students from all countries, and we enroll from more than 100 countries. We have only 12% of our international students in our campuses. But in any case, as our university is one of the biggest in Russia, the number of international students is more than 5,000. And we received previously, every year, almost 600 international students on our short-term mobility programs. Obviously, zero mobility last year, zero physical mobility, and also very difficult enrollment for the physical presence of international students. And we switched very quickly to online learning, as all our colleagues. And at the same time, we switched them online also. First, our previous projects, for example, so-called Olympiad we organize every year, online global scholarship competition. We covered previously 20 countries with our offline presence. We moved in these countries, and now we organized it online only. We covered more than 90 countries with 3,000 participants. It's a very important point for us to choose to select talented students, because it's oriented to undergraduates, to programs for pupils of secondary schools. And it's organized not like a test exam, but a competition on different creative topics, in order to understand who is able to study at the university. And the best pupils receive scholarships and receive grants. We moved on online project here, and we offered also 2 new projects, the so-called study tour experience this year, for more than 200 international students coming from almost 40 countries, selected on competitive basis, no participation fees. And it means that selected students had the opportunity to follow for a week different programs of our university. In the parallel time, we launched also so-called class experience, when selected students, international students, has the possibility to follow different lectures. So in this way, we try to show what is our university, what kind of programs we can offer online or even offline when there will be this possibility. And we organized for all of international students, and by the way, also for Russian students who studied online, digital assistants. So students for the last year of their program, undergraduate or graduate programs, helped other people, other students for the first year to understand what is our university, what is our values of our university, how the process of educational process is organized. So in fact, we organized different tools to open our university to other countries, to other students. And at the same time, we could understand, yes, what was mentioned by my colleagues, online makes higher education maybe more accessible. But at the same time, we understand that the gap between different countries, different regions, even in our country, because Russia is too big, the difference is very important now, maybe much more important. This kind of digital inequality is a very high risk for internationalization of education, of online education. And we have to be very careful with this kind of problem. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor Ivan. I think there's a common thread to this conversation that, you know, we've, as universities, we're constantly trying new things, and that question of agility just sort of comes in every time I turn to one of my speakers. So I'm just quickly taking a look at the time. We're good for time for another round of questions, and then we can open it up to the audience. Let's turn to technology. Now, my next question will be to Professor Santiago. So Professor Santiago, obviously we've moved, our dependence on technology has grown multifold over the last year and a half, right? We are now meeting on online platforms on a daily, hourly basis, right? We're reaching out to students wherever they are, whether they're in our own home countries or across the world, you know, through digital marketing. Now, what aspects of this adoption of technology do you think will be used even you know, after things hopefully get back to normal. So we're expecting at some point of time in the next 6 months to a year, depending upon where we are, things should get back to some semblance of normalcy. But my question to you, sir, is that what aspects of technology or what aspects of this adoption of technology do you see universities continuing to have even after the COVID-19 pandemic? Professor Santiago.
Thanks very much. And of course, there's a number of things that are here to stay, which enhance the whole learning process, which includes, for example, the use of technology in order to assess the skills of participants and students and to measure the impact of education throughout the learning process. There's also the use of the learning management systems and the educational platforms, the use of interactive multimedia materials, and the use of hybrid formats that combine both synchronous in presence classes or maybe via streaming that adapt very well, to the circumstances of students, particularly for those who may be attending, classes from their homes, given that they may be under lockdowns or they may be just confined, or they may have problems in terms of international mobility, which is still an issue, as my predecessors have commented, and we have to, try to resume international mobility as soon as possible. But anyway, apart from all these things, what I guess is that technology, what the pandemic has actually shown is that technology is not a foe, but it's actually a friend. No? Yeah. And I guess that most of our faculty members have discovered that far from replacing the job, it enhances the role of the professor. I mean, technology doesn't actually replace faculty. It actually brings lots of instruments in order that the faculty can actually convey their role as instructors and as teachers in the best possible way. So what I expect is that in the future, we will see the development of many more apps and platforms and solutions in order to enhance the flexibility and the impact of the whole learning process. There will be segments of education much more affected by technology, for example, executive education and non-degree programs. It's amazing because over the pandemic, this segment of education, continuous learning or lifelong learning, has multiplied in terms of online offerings. It was a segment very reluctant, to attend the courses online because companies were sending their executives mostly to in-presence seminars and courses. But the fact is that this is now experienced and companies are happy and probably irreversible. We will see also the increase of non-degree technology-based programs, certificates, micro-credentials, and all sorts of stackable degrees. And of course, even if face-to-face in presence education is not replaceable by just, artificial intelligence or augmented reality, because we need some sort of animal feedback. We need to be together in a room and even, if you allow me the expression, smell each other. It's part of the learning process. I mean, in fact, children, when they are small, they learn by touching things, no? So we have also this dependency on the use of senses in order to learn. But despite that, what we realize is that technology can actually enhance many other facets of the learning process. So the overall, result of the pandemic as regards learning can be seen, as a positive outcome, because I guess we will see, progress, and that we will take in steps in the future in order to make the whole learning process much more impactful.
Right. Wonderful. So I do appreciate the fact that you mentioned that technology is now being viewed as an enabler rather than a disruptor, right? The disruption has already happened in the form of the pandemic. We're grateful to have certain technologies at our fingertips to enable us as faculty members. Of course, there are challenges coming out from hybrid versus online, and I'm seeing a number of audience questions on the efficacy of online learning versus hybrid learning, synchronous versus asynchronous, right? But I want to turn my attention to the financial impact of student outreach and recruitment strategies. And I want to turn now again to Professor Rao. And of course, AUW is a very, very different university financially speaking. What has been, if you could share, Professor Rao, the financial impact of the pandemic on student outreach and recruitment strategies? Because your recruitment strategy, as you mentioned earlier, moves into remote areas, across Asia, works with a number of conflict-ridden areas across Asia. How has that been affected? Has there been a financial impact on your student outreach and recruitment strategy?
Thank you, Arjya. I think it's more than financial. There are other practical considerations that have got in the way. I think in terms of the financial, of course, we had to make a very quick upfront investment in upgrading our technology, our platforms. So we have a Moodle, for example, but we had to enhance its capacity, server capacity, and so on. So that called for immediate, huge investment. When I say considerable investment, it's in light of the country we are in and the kind of institution we're operating. That said, despite the investment, the problem in a country like Bangladesh is the poor internet connection altogether. So no matter what you do in terms of enhancing, investing, and upgrading your technology, you still have a fundamental problem if the internet connection itself is not strong and not readily amenable at all times. I couldn't agree with Professor Santiago's analysis more in terms of how to engage students. I mean, in the context of the financial difficulties, especially that you raise, apart from investment, I think, in terms of outreach, we've not had a huge, it's not had an impact in financial terms, because what we do is in all these 19 different countries, it's not standard recruitment. We need local foundations to help us. We look for support from NGOs, for example. BRAC is a very big presence in Afghanistan, for example. They help us recruit, and that recruitment has been going on regardless. And in some areas like the deep hills and remote areas, we look to academics. For example, in SOAS, for example, there are academics who worked in the northeast fringe states of Myanmar. They speak the local language. So we use academics in these parts of the world to actually reach the organizations and recruit. So financially, it's not made a huge impact in those terms. I think the real problem has come for us in Asia, particularly, is none of the schools have had their high HSC examinations. Everything's been deferred. I'm sure even in India it's happened. And we don't have anything called conditional offers as we do in the UK. In UK, we have predicted grades, we have conditional offers, and you can manage the admission process in that sense. But in Bangladesh, we don't have conditional offers. So for the first time, I had to tell our admissions team, let's make conditional offers on the basis of predicted grades. And even to get the schools to give predicted grades has been a lot of work, trying to work with them to get them. In places like Cambodia, Timor-Leste, Laos, these schools, they don't have predicted grades, nor do they have examinations. So there's a shrinking pool of applicants, if you see what I mean. It's nothing to do, not much to do with financial, but the practicalities of getting that pool sorted.
Wonderful.
I mean, I could go on all afternoon about that.
Right, of course. But thank you so much, Professor Rao, for keeping it crisp. I'd like to now move over to something that one of our panelists mentioned earlier, the aspect of certificate programs, right? And we are seeing, with the advent of online programs and people questioning, is an online education worth it, and so on and so forth. And of course, with a number of companies, including Google, coming out with their own certification programs, I want to open this question up to the entire panel. So Professor Debora, Professor Ivan, whoever would like to come in on this, have the priorities of students changed thanks to the pandemic? For example, would a student of higher education view higher education as a means to an end, which is I need to be self-reliant, I need to be self-employed, or I need to be employed at some point of time. And therefore, am I looking at higher education simply as a means to end up getting a job or starting a career? And therefore, can a traditional higher education sort of program be replaced by a certificate? Because under both circumstances, I am stuck in front of a screen, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous learning. So would you say that the priorities of incoming students in 2020, 2021, has that changed at any point of time? I'd like Professor Debora to address this, please, if you don't mind. You're on mute, Professor Debora.
There's nothing else to say that for every student, the priority is education, regardless the means, the end of the education. I think every student, when it comes to the university and whatever the setting or the way that it goes with the end of the road is to be educated. That is the basic of everything, is to get the education. And then after that, you can decide what happened. But I think the way the world is changing so fast, and I'm guessing the way the economy might become very different than the way we know that today, may determine how the student look at, you know, the training or the opportunity of education in front of them. I think as an institution, us at university, our priority is to dispense the best education possible, so these people can be actors in the world, not only for Edinburgh or the UK, but for the rest of the world, to be an impact. We look at impact. This is how we call it Edinburgh impact. We look how these youngers come to Edinburgh to get the best education, and from that, to make a better world. Right. And that's what I think I should say about that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Debora. So we're looking to make an impact even in higher education, even now, even within the pandemic. Professor, same question. Do you feel that student priorities would have changed over the last 1.5 years?
My question?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to follow, maybe to continue what was said by Professor Kayembe. In fact, education is the main priority of all universities everywhere and during all the times. But obviously, times are changing. I'm not sure that we now may analyze and to say, in fact, what's happened and what preferences, what kind of preferences changed. For us, maybe only one remark, practical remark, that we noticed this year that the number of applications for the master's program is falling down drastically. Undergraduate programs are more or less the same by number of applicants as last year. Master's programs are not anymore popular as previously. I don't know if it's a phenomenon only for our university, maybe for other too. What we may say always in the context of the pandemic, that master's programs are shorter, and students, applicants for master's programs prefer to be present in classes, to have this kind of experience in a short time. They are afraid to pass 1 or 2 years only online. The second point is waiting for changes, for the normalization of the situation. Students, applicants for master's programs are able to find a job. It means that they may wait for 1, 2, 3 years when the situation will change. It's only a short remark that we have now in the pandemic situation. But generally speaking, I suppose that all changes that we are living now push all universities to diversify their offer. Once again, we said that probably Corona accelerated much more all processes that we lived previously. So we have to adopt different programs, shorter, of micro degree, of course. or completely online programs, specific programs for different markets, because also we see that the behavior of applicants is different now from different geographical zones, Africa, Asia, Europe. So if we want to attract more international students, also for online or blended programs, we have to differentiate our offer to include more online elements or to create specific online programs, short degree programs or short micro degree programs. It will be a big challenge for all of us in the next years.
Right. So thank you so very much, Professor Ivan. There's one, so I've come to the end of the moderator questions, and we're going to open it up to a few audience questions, and I've already received a number of them, you know, on our YouTube channel. Now, these questions are going to be open to anybody who would like to answer them. And I'd like to start with something that, again, goes back to the practical aspects of online student recruitment, right? Now, we've all agreed that as universities, we've had to rethink our strategies. We've had to, you know, go places that we never thought we would go, right? So at the same time, what's happening is that most universities are falling back on digital marketing, right? In its various forms, whether it's content-based marketing, whether it's paid advertising, whether it's search advertising, and there are so many different modes to it. As a result, what's happened over the last year and a half is that a lot of students and parents are complaining of what we would call Zoom fatigue or webinar fatigue, right? And there is this this bombardment, I would say, of information, not just from universities, but you know, from all and sundry, right? So if I were to do a search on a particular product, for the next 3 days, I will be shown advertisements of that particular product, no matter where I go. And that's just one product. Now, the same would apply to a number of institutes of higher education. So if I were to look up, let's say, you know, an online degree course, for the next 3 days, I will be pursued by that particular institution or by that particular organization or company. So there's a lot of marketing noise that's happening there, right? Now, in this scenario where, all right, maybe in 2020, Zoom and webinars were really novel, right? And people would want to engage with them. But over time, we've seen that there's a fatigue. There's, you know, people may not want to engage as much as last year. There's still some engagement. My question to all our distinguished speakers on the panel is that what can we as universities do, or what strategies can we adopt to drive student enrollment while authentically engaging with students? Now, over here, I think there's one point that I think everybody will agree on. To provide content or to provide information or to provide engagement which is authentic, right? Not for the sake of providing content or engagement, right? But to actually showcase what we as universities stand for. And I particularly enjoyed Professor Debora's point that, you know, we should drive a change, we should inspire, etc. Right? And I think that's what most universities choose to do. So how can we change our strategies to drive more engagement with prospective students? I'm opening this up to the entire panel, whoever wants to take a shot at it.
Arjya, if I may just
yes, Professor.
Go first, if you don't mind. I don't think, you may call me a skeptic, but I don't think this whole online virtual approach is going to fully substitute for who we are and what we do as universities. At the end of the day, universities can adopt all kinds of strategies. And of course, the last 18 months has been a very humbling experience, emotionally difficult, very humbling. And universities have been very agile in adapting and harnessing technology and opening up in new ways, both for new recruitment as well as current students. But I don't believe from the students' perspective, the online is going to be substituting for real degrees, real experience. Students want to get to universities. Universities are more than buildings, right? They're about scholarship, they're about scholars and students coming together, interacting, and that
debate and conversations. Yes.
And I think after this settles, it will come back. Everything will come back. That said, I'm sure the universities are also thinking about how best to actually reach areas and people, students who otherwise might not be able to come. Of course, some universities, like in parts of the world, and my colleagues themselves have said, they've got very good distance learning programs. But for you new universities that have not really adopted those positions, they are, I'm sure they're all thinking about how best we can develop a distance learning strategy that will complement and that will supplement what we are doing. It's about enhancement rather than substitution. And I think that's how I would look at this whole online, both in terms of recruitment and in terms of engaging students. Of course, for the first time, we went into virtual open days. We've never had, for example. We've had interviews with students online, which we've never had in the past. We used to have it on site. So I think the both will run now. I mean, if there's one lesson to be taken away, it is how best we can use technology to actually enhance our own experience of reaching out to students and engaging them more.
Right. Thank
Nothing
you very much,
but being
Professor.
outside.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor. That's a silver lining. I have Professor Santiago and Professor Ivan, whose hands are raised. Professor Santiago, over to you.
Sure. No, you probably recall that debate some years ago about whether platform was king or whether it was content, whether universities should invest in producing content or whether on developing their own technology platforms. And what I guess is the challenge for universities is not actually developing tech platforms nor even, producing content, because they are both commodities, let's be very honest. And it's not our business. Our business is not actually developing, LMSs or what I normally say is that technology platforms may be prince, content may be king, but what becomes the emperor is actually the experience. So I guess the challenge for universities is how they gather all these elements and put their faculty at the forefront of a whole experience in order that they can actually manage all the different elements that are at hand. That's the real challenge, how to improve the actual educational experience of their students.
Right. So you're suggesting that a university which is sort of driving conversations and debates and discourse, for them, it's really, really important to present their faculty members to prospective students. Is that the bottom line?
Very much. I mean, the involvement of the faculty in the whole learning process is key. And as far as we can actually train them in order to manage this very stressful environment, because now we are asking them not just to perform well in class, but also to manage all these technologies at hand. So I guess we need to invest in the development of our faculty, of course.
I completely agree with you, Professor Santiago. And I'm so glad to see 5 faculty members from various parts of the world in this panel itself. Professor Ivan, you've got your hand raised. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yes, I completely agree. The experience, knowledge, of course, but now the experience, the know-how is much more important than previously for all our students. And at the same time, we have also to implement in their minds all our values, academic values and civic values too. And in the framework always of total digitalization, it's very challenging. It's very difficult. I agree that technologies are an important tool, but not the solution. Obviously, we have to use them and to develop the using of them. And for our university, probably the pandemic switch to online was not a big shock because, for example, we introduced online procedures for the admissions of international students in 2017. And since this time, we have introduced, for example, CRM, customer relations management, as a big corporation. And I suppose that we'll go on, all university will go on with this tool, because it's very helpful, very useful. We receive more than 100,000 contacts. After that, we transform them in 10,000 applications, and we receive 200 students every year from abroad, more or less. So it's impossible to work with all this data with digital tools, and it's helped us to propose the right orientations also inside the university for all these applicants, for all these students. But at the same time, we have more than be more attentive to our own behavior with our students, how to work with all digital tools, because we know that for many professors it was very challenging to change the style of teaching from in classes to online. And we have to develop new, not only the new knowledge, but the new know-how ourselves. I mean, professors, educators, administrators, to be able to work with young students, young people who is maybe more agile than we are. It's also very challenging. And third point, as I said, values and civic position. I mentioned the example of the digital assistant inside the university, when there is an interaction between students from different ages and different levels of education. But we also introduced, for example, the institution of so-called silver proctors. We invited retired people over 60, over 65, to help the university, to help students, and to be proctors during the online test, online examination. So once again, now we have to live with all technology, with all digital work that we face. But at the same time, we have to preserve and to develop also traditional values of our institutions.
Wonderful. So I think the underlying sort of strain over here seems to suggest that universities are more than just physical buildings or virtual settings, right? They are about conversations, they're about debates, they're about people coming together, right? And it's not just, you know, faculty members and students, but it's also between students. So my suggestion on my 2 bits, my 2 points to this conversation is that not only do we use technology, and I think our panelists have put it very, very rightly, our job is not to create platforms. Our job is not to create the technology. Yes, there are these technologies available, but if we can use our faculty members and existing students, perhaps alumni, to drive that conversation forward, right? I think that would be a fantastic example of authenticity of content, right? I think I've got time for one last question, and I'm going to address this to Professor Debora, because it has been mentioned in the YouTube chat boxes, specifically for the University of Edinburgh. So the question goes, what kind of global outreach programs does the University of Edinburgh have? And what steps have been taken by the University of Edinburgh to implement the global outreach policy? Professor Debora.
Well, the University of Edinburgh is traditionally a global university, it has to be said. Our recruitment process is online. Even before the pandemic, we try to reach as much as we can. I think we have a competitivity side of students, because we always select the best student candidates to come to our university. And secondly, there is a few reasons, but now fundings and scholarship has grown much and much and much, and now it's almost regional. We have the African region with the MasterCard scholarship program. We have the Asian. So we try to adapt the reality of the way we are recruiting our students. So the university now is looking at, because of what the pandemic has shown us and the differences that exist and the gap into inequality that we have, that the pandemic opened our eyes, then we realized, oh, hang on a minute, we need to fix something here. We need to adapt somewhere around. But the University of Edinburgh is a global university. It's open to anyone who wishes to come. And the recruitment is so simple. We've been on the online system. We didn't create a new platform. If you wish to come to Edinburgh University, you go online to the Edinburgh University website, you apply for your subject, you apply for a scholarship. It's everything there available already. But we are trying this time to make it more proactive because of the reality that we're facing today. So the university is determined to look at every aspect of the way that the world is changing, because it's changing very fast, and we are adapting to that. So welcome to Edinburgh if you wish to come.
Well said, Professor Debora. All right, I noticed that it is 3:56 p.m. Indian Standard Time. We've got 4 minutes, a very quick round of closing remarks by all of our panel members, and then we can move on to the next session. Professor Nirmala Rai, let's start with you.
I just want to say that the important message is education should be accessible, should be affordable, and universities must do everything to reach the last mile.
Thank you very much. Professor Santiago.
Well, I guess technology provides us with lots of opportunities to improve the learning process. We have the challenge of training our faculty in order to reach this new stage. And at the same time, we have fantastic students who are committed, who are resilient, and who are very understanding. They have actually suffered, you know, all the difficulties and obstacles with a very, an excellent smile and a very good attitude. So that's probably the best asset that we have.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Santiago. Professor Ivan.
So we live difficult times, but also times of big opportunities. And I am sure that all universities will overcome this period. As I said, preserving traditions, preserving the capacity to build relations between people from different countries, from different cultures, to work face to face. Finally, but at the same time, able to adopt new tools and to develop the skills of young people, talented young people, in which they are need.
Right. All right. Any last words, Professor Debora?
The University of Edinburgh is doing so well during this pandemic, I have to say that, and we are so proud of our communities and students, everybody within the university structure, working so hard to make sure that our students make impact to the rest of the world. This is our motto. We need to impact the world for the best. Thank you.
I agree. All right. Thank you so very much, my distinguished speakers. It has been an absolutely riveting and fascinating conversation over the last 1 hour. One of the key takeaways that I feel we can all agree on is that while the pandemic has affected us all in ways that we could possibly not even imagine, there remain certain institutions within our global cultures that have withstood perhaps far worse in the past, are still withstanding and possibly will withstand more shocks in the future, that being that of the university. I'm so very glad that one common factor within all of us today has been that of resilience, that even though we've been met with wide sweeping changes, universities have been agile enough to adjust their student recruitment strategies and to consider what had not been considered before. With that, I'd like to thank my panelists again. Thank you so very much for spending your valuable time with us. And it's over to you, Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, all yours.
Thank you very much, Arjya, and thank you, Professor Debora, Kayembe, Professor Prostakov, Professor Santiago, and of course, Professor Nirmala Rai. What an extraordinary panel focusing on a very important set of issues that have been less spoken about. I deeply appreciate the time and your contribution to this panel. We will be writing to you about some of these reflections and also some of the future initiatives that we intend to do. I want to, first of all, really thank you for your presence, and take care and be safe. And we'll be starting the next panel in 15 minutes with a short break from now. Thank you very much.